If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Long-distance drivers and others who frequently travel on backroads, what's the creepiest experience you've had overnighting in the middle of nowhere? I believe a dogman or werewolf, whatever you wish to call it, saved my life. A year ago, I was driving home in a storm and caught a glimpse of something dark running on the hill. My truck had fishtailed and went over the guardrail, tumbling down the hill. I vaguely remember hearing an animalistic grunt and my truck hitting something. I heard scraping and felt as if my truck had been dragged and then placed against two trees. I heard a deep howl, then the sound of running. I woke up in the hospital and thought I had dreamt it until I visited my truck a while later and saw claw marks on the roof as well as black fur caught on a broken piece of my truck. In 2001, my husband and I were driving outside of New Wilmington, Pennsylvania, late one night. It was around 2 to 3 in the morning. We had received a call that someone may have spotted our lost beagle. It was October, and we had a quiet moment while we were driving down this dusky country road. The moon was out and did light things up, but it was still dusk-like. All of a sudden, we heard a bird fly above us. It swooped down, soaring above our SUV. We thought it landed on our vehicle because we sort of lifted up a little off the road. Our windows were down, and the bird had come so close to our vehicle that when it soared back up, it kind of lifted us up, or felt like it anyway. We both looked at each other and said, "What the hell was that?" We looked up in the sky, and a huge grayish-white-like bird with a wingspan of about 13 to 16 feet soared to a nearby white tree without leaves. It blended in so well that the bird disappeared when it landed on the limb. The tree looked petrified or dead-like. I said to my husband, "That is the biggest bird I have ever seen in my life." I called it the Birdman because its legs were so long and dangled like a man's legs. We came home and told our children, who are teens, the following morning, and they laughed at us. It almost looked prehistoric. I still find it hard to believe what we saw. When I came home from work this morning, my husband told me he heard about this big bird thing on Coast to Coast. I'm glad to hear we are not the only ones who have seen this amazing bird. In the middle of nowhere in Dorset, about 3 a.m., I was driving along the back roads, trying out some new spotlights I had fitted. Then I spotted a figure about 6 feet tall standing in the middle of the road ahead, staring at me as I approached. I was wearing an all-black hoodie, the hood up covering my face and hands in the front pocket. I was doing 50 to 60 miles per hour towards the figure and decided I wasn't stopping. I've heard stories of 4x4s being stolen in similar instances. I slowed to 30 miles per hour as I approached and kept my full beams on. I honed my horn as I approached. I ended up mounting the verge to drive past at good speed, as the figure just stood in the center of the narrow road, staring at me as I drove past. I went back the next day, and there were no signs of anyone camping, no houses, no crashed cars, just my tire marks on the grass. I think I did the right thing by not stopping. I've been an avid follower of phantoms and monsters for years, but have never bothered to submit any of the strange encounters that I've had during my life. However, the reports of cloaked entities reminded me of one of the strangest. During the fall of 2010, I don't remember the exact date, my friend Jeffrey and I decided to go to our local GameStop late in the evening. We left the mall shortly before they closed at 9 p.m., and the weather outside had decided to rain. This is important, as it led to my deciding to take back roads home instead of using the interstate, and it also allowed us to see what we did. The area is quite rural, and in seconds, you go from city to countryside. After crossing one of the bridges over Interstate 55, the road has a small depression and then has a long hillside. As we neared the bottom of the depression, there was another car headed towards us at the top of the hill, about 500 feet away, and then something ran across the road just a few feet in front of my vehicle. The reason I say something is because there was nothing there, almost as if there was a hole in the rain. Imagine an animal about the size of a large cat or a dog the size of a cocker spaniel running through the rain, and then take away the animal. I could see the raindrops hitting its back, roughly 18 inches above the pavement, and the raindrops hitting the pavement around it on all sides. From the pattern it left in the rain, I had the impression that it was a four-legged creature, due to the raindrop pattern being about 2.5 feet long, about 1 foot wide, and 1.5 feet in height. It only took it about 2 seconds to cross in front of us, from right to left. After it disappeared, I asked Jeffrey, "Did you see that?" His reply was, "I did, but I wasn't going to say anything because I didn't want you to think I was crazy. I have seen many things in my life, some of which I may share later, but this incident has to be the oddest one of all." So I live in Denver, and one day my friend told me about this haunted road, Riverdale Road, out in Thornton or so. It's this road out in the country that, I guess, gets super dark at night, to the point that you can't see anything while driving. I guess 3 witches were hung on a tree out there, and on an old farm, a man went crazy and killed his family by burning down his house. Only the gate to the property is intact, and people call it the gates of hell. There's also a story about a woman in white who stands by the road, and if you stop, she disappears. Well, a few weeks ago, we decided we would actually go out there. And honestly, I was super disappointed. I saw nothing and felt nothing. Honestly, I wasn't even sure we were on the right road until signs confirmed it. It wasn't dark at all. The lights from the city lit up the whole road. I will say that we didn't see any other cars while going down the road, although we saw them right as we entered and left. There were houses lined up and down the street, and that really ruined the creepy, abandoned feel we were looking for. So my question is, have any of you guys had experience on this road? And also, are there any places in Colorado that will actually give me some communication with a spirit? Around 4:30 a.m. this morning, I was on a very rural stretch of road between 2 small towns. There are some houses here and there, but it's basically a small country store every 20 to 30 miles type of thing for 90 to 100 miles. So I'm driving along, taking my time nice and relaxed, and I see this small, magpie-looking dog pop up on top of the snowbank. It was very dark gray or black. He ran in front of my truck along the snowbank for a couple seconds, then disappeared just as soon as he appeared. I didn't dart into the ditch or anything, I just popped up, sprinted on top of the snowbank, and then was gone. I know this sounds crazy, and I've seen questionable things before that made me blink a few times, but this was by far the most real seeming experience. I'm not saying it was tangible, but goddamn, it was bizarre. I blinked a couple times, then remembered a story I read a while ago about truckers and a black dog. So I'm wondering if anyone else has ever seen this. My family on my mom's side owns property in a small town in Texas. They live near a river, so we'll drive up to hang out, camp, and swim. It's a 5 to 6 hour drive to and from the property, and the main road that you have to take is surrounded by woods. It's so scary at night because it's pitch black, and the only light you can get is from the moon and the car lights. One time, when my family was making our way home, I kept seeing eyes shining from inside the forest. Of course, I just thought it was the animals in the woods. All of a sudden, my mom starts driving way faster than she usually does. I asked her why she was going so fast, especially on a super dark road, but she just told me not to worry about it. I looked in the passenger side mirror and saw a huge, dark figure running right behind our car. It was like it was chasing our car. I couldn't really make out what it was, but I wanted to scream. My mom told me not to, so I wouldn't wake up my sisters and get them freaked out too. We finally lost it after a while, and me and my mom talked about it when we finally got home. My mom thinks that maybe it was a bear, but I looked it up and there weren't any reported bears in that area. I didn't bring it back up with her, but it still creeps me out. We still go back to the property, but my mom makes sure that we leave before it gets dark, so don't run into that thing again. This is one of my dad's stories. Growing up, he lived with his grandmother. His siblings lived with their parents, while he helped his grandmother until her passing. Basically, this takes place in northeastern Oklahoma, in the Cherokee Nation. Now this could have just been satanic panic, since it was the 80s. But basically, the first of every month, clearing with a flat stone in the middle of it. There was something that looked like blood, so they went back and told everyone. The elders told them they were devil worshippers from out of state and to never go back there. They continued to see the people in white from time to time and even tried to catch them a few times, but no one ever had a plan if they did. But every time they chased them, they would just vanish. Even while driving on a dirt road, the car would just vanish. There was even a story from a cop in the next town over that chased one of the cars, and when it actually pulled over, no one was driving it. It then took off on its own when he went to get in his cruiser. This went on for a few years until the area got too dangerous for a while, and everyone kind of forgot about it. Though sometimes you'll still see really fancy cars with out-of-state tags coming out of old dirt roads. A shadow appeared right in front of me on the road. Yesterday, I was riding my bike back home at 12:30 a.m. It was also a bit foggy that night, but still clear enough to see what's happening in front of me. I live in Belguim and have to ride through a rural area on a dark, quiet road that leads to a big forest that I also have to go through. It is known in my village that in the forest, many suicides have happened, mostly by hanging. I was coming back from being with friends. And it was about 1:30 in the morning. Before you get off that road, you drive on a small stretch of street that is inhabited and completely lit by street lamps. While I was driving on the lit part of the road, a black shadow that looked like a person appeared 20 meters in front of me in the middle of the road. There was nothing around the road that could cause a shadow, so there was no logical response to that shadow. The most punishing thing was that the spot where it was standing was completely illuminated. The phantom hovered 50 centimeters or so in the air and was, I think, 2 meters high. And she looked like a person. I drove on toward the phantom because I had to go that way because it was the shortest way home. And the shum stayed put, and I drove in front of it. Then I looked back, and it was gone. My mom told me afterwards that a good friend of my family also hanged himself there 5 years ago. Maybe it was him. I can still see it in front of me when I close my eyes. My true story took place in the early 1960s in Minnesota. After all these years, there are only a handful of people who have ever been told the story of what happened that summer night as we were leaving my uncle's farmhouse. I asked my father years after the event if he ever told my uncle what happened as we were leaving his driveway to turn onto that dark county road. His answer was a sound no. I never told him anything about it. When asked why not, he said, he would never have believed me anyway. Here's what happened. We just drove out of my uncle's driveway at about 10:30 p.m. on a Saturday night and turned right facing east onto the county road when one of us in the car cried out, "Look at that," while pointing to the southeast skyline. From the horizon, we saw a flaming ball of fire coursing diagonally right in our direction from the southeast to the northwest. What was so odd was that this object was low in the sky and not moving very fast, hardly seeming fast enough to keep in the sky. From a distance of what I would say was 2 or 3 miles from our car, it would pass directly over our car in just a minute or so. This ball of flames, which looked to be about the size of a small house, was so intensely on fire that flames were trailing behind for 30, 40, maybe 50 feet or more. We were unable to see what was actually on fire. The flames were billowing out of whatever was in the intense fire center, and this thing was going to cross above us at just a couple hundred feet. When the fireball got to the end of a wood line, where it would cross over a small 40-acre field, it would be just a few seconds, and it would pass right above us. But instead of continuing its course, all of a sudden it turned left and followed the far edge of the field, crossed over a ridge, and disappeared into the night. We in the car said nothing. My dad continued on our drive home. We didn't talk about it right after it happened. It was never brought up again. About 5 years ago, I remembered the event and said to my sister, "Do you remember that night when that flaming ball crossed the sky at our uncle's house?" She didn't remember. My other sister didn't remember, and my mom didn't remember. Last chance, I asked my dad. Yes, he did remember. I told this true story because I didn't want our story to end because it was so unique. I have never heard of a story like this before. But I lived it, and every word is true. Since this event happened, my same uncle had a UFO pass over his car while driving in his area. His car engine died and restarted after it passed over. We were on our way back from a wedding. My girlfriend and I were laughing and generally having a good time as we headed to our hotel the next town over. It should have been a 40-minute drive on a 2-lane highway, but flooding had washed the highway out. Our GPS rerouted us on an auxiliary road. Bumpy asphalt soon gave way to gravel. Have you ever been on the back roads of Iowa on a moonless night? The darkness was oppressing. We could barely see 20 feet in front of us with the brights on. The GPS lost signal. We pulled over to pull out the map. The corn rustled, and a man stepped out. I am not easily scared, but in that moment, it felt like an icy hand gripped my heart. I peeled out of there like a bat out of hell. As soon as we were 200 feet down the road, the GPS found a signal, and we were safely on our way. I've encountered the paranormal many times, as I love to go out to cemeteries and converse with the other side, safely and with the correct precautions and conclusions. I am no stranger to the unknown or unseen. I have encountered a skinwalker and seen it with my own eyes. I haven't felt this scared since my first and only encounter with one. Last night, I, 24F, was driving from my parents' house. I was out of a job for a while and couldn't afford to live on my own until I found one. I'm a preschool special education teacher. I went to a friend's house to help her go through her first baby's baby clothes in order to get ready for baby number 2. She lives about 10 minutes away, and I know her route like the back of my hand as I have driven it dozens of times. I'm jamming out to Hamilton, as one does. I'm putting my heart and soul into this one-woman show and truly feeling the feelings behind each character's lines. I'm pouring my soul into it, and I was in my spiritual happy place. Everything is fine. Until it wasn't. I am about 2 miles away from her house when I just feel my arms pull me down this road I have never seen before. I start driving down it and go to turn on my GPS to help me figure something out. It wasn't there. I notice there is one light pole on the road, and I have passed it. And there's an overwhelming sense of dread that was growing thicker and heavier every inch my wheels turned. Oh, I ducked up feeling. This is not safe feeling. I immediately find a way to do a 3-point turn and get my happy as hell out of Dodge. I get to my friend's house, and I'm a shaking mess, pulling everything I need inside. I told this to her and her husband, and they looked at each other like, WTF? Because I am never scared like that. They start asking me questions about where the road was, what happened, did you see anything, etc. I told them my skinwalker story and told them I had not been this frightened since that day. They were in shock. I immediately did an egg cleanse because that !+ was not staying with me all night long and keeping me awake. Needless to say, I was not comfortable going back outside, so I stayed the night with them. I didn't sleep a wink, and I've been up for 30 hours now. I drove home about 30 minutes ago, and that road was not there on my way home. As I'm typing this, I'm back to shaking like a chihuahua in dead weather without a sweater. Something was calling out to my body while I was out of mine. I've had a few, but the scariest would have to be a few months ago, around 2 a.m., with my wife and daughter in the car. My daughter was asleep, but my wife was awake. I'm driving on a rural 4-lane road when I see a black male in the far distance with a safety vest standing in the middle of the right lane. I was in the left lane, looking my way. I'm wondering what in the hell this man is doing, so as I'm approaching, I slow to around 40 miles per hour, paying close attention to what he's doing, and just as I'm about to pass, he looks dead at me and does a suicidal leap right in front of my car. I screamed and slammed on my brakes, but the man was gone. I'm freaking out and shaking, thinking I'm going crazy, and my wife asked what's wrong with me and freaked out when I told her. She said the road was clear the whole time, and there definitely wasn't a man, apparently considering he vanished as I made an impact. I still have no idea why I saw the man, but he was so well defined, even with his eyes looking straight at me before he jumped in front of my car. It still freaks me out. So I was driving home from a friend's house, where we were playing a game. It's a 30-minute drive, and I grew up driving these specific roads. I'm 1 mile from home entering the town where I live, and I see my lights hit a speed limit sign that reflects brightly back at me, saying 50 miles per hour. As I look at it, my windshield wipers move across my vision and seem to stop on the windshield halfway through their path. I have enough time to register this when my eyes go black and I can't move. All I can hear is my heater going, and I can feel the heated seat and steering wheel. It was like the power went out and the sensation that the vehicle had gone from 55 to 0 instantly. Then, all of a sudden, my vision snapped back on, and for a split second, I saw that the windshield wiper was still stuck. As I acknowledged it, the wiper started moving normally, completing the movement. Everything was fine. I don't think this was death in one dimension and moving to another. Everything seems the same. I think it was a glitch, and it only affected my eyes and my ability to move. I still felt, could hear, and thought. Maybe it was a time slip, maybe something else. Let me know if anyone else has experienced something like this or has any ideas. This happened a few years ago in Wyandotte, Michigan, near Detroit. So I'll start by saying that I've dealt with sleep paralysis on a regular basis since I was a kid. It used to freak me out when I was younger, but now it's just a part of life. Anyhow, I arrive at this shipper late one evening and check in to get loaded the next morning. The young lady at the front desk tells me I can park overnight on site, or there's a truck stop not too far down the road. Me, wanting to spare those sweet 20 minutes it'd take to drive from that truck stop to the shipper the next day, decides to park on site for the night. Unbeknownst to me at the time, the shipper's lot for overnight parking is practically in the middle of a cemetery. This spooked me out, but I don't really believe in that paranormal shit. So I park, close my shades, and lay down for the night. A few weeks prior, I switched up my bedtime routine to include earplugs, a sleeping mask, and 1 milligram of melatonin. Anyone who's had to sleep at a truck stop will understand. On this particular night, I happened to wake up in the middle of the night, paralyzed. It was dark, I couldn't see anything. I had earplugs in, I couldn't hear anything. And I couldn't move. I remember my first thought being, am I dead? Typically, this wouldn't freak me out, as I've stated before, this was normal to me. However, tonight I just happened to be sleeping just a few yards away from the actual dead. That night, as is typical with most nights I've experienced SP, I felt a presence in the truck with me. I felt something crawl into my bunk with me and lay across my body as if it were trying to pin me down. I felt the cab shaking, though it was likely me trying to shake myself awake as I usually do. After some time, I was finally able to jolt myself awake, and I'd awaken in a cold sweat with a chill creeping up my spine. At that point, I was honestly afraid to pull back the shades and peek outside. But yeah, that was the creepiest thing I've experienced. A close second was the time a lot of lizards knocked on my door in the middle of the night outside of Birmingham, Al. Other than that, I didn't see much action. There's a back road in my hometown that winds along a section of the river with a small nature park on one side and steep, loose rock hills that jut up on the other side. At the end, it forks, and you can either go up the hills towards the highway or cross a very old one-lane trestle bridge and head into town. During the summer, the trestle is a major draw for teenage daredevils who climb to the top scaffolds and jump into the river below. Next to the bridge is a small historical park area due to the section of the river being a popular place to ford during the Oregon Trail period. There are a few stories of pioneers being drowned when they tried to cross during the snowmelt when the tides were too high and the current was too fast. The fog tends to settle in the river valley, and there are no streetlights, so it can get pretty eerie at night, and if you miss a curve, you can end up in the river. There's a lot of reports of phantom lights on the river islands, shadow people in the fog, disembodied voices and noises, and some drivers have claimed to experience ghost headlights that wait on the other side of the bridge but fade away once you start to cross. When I was in high school, it was a popular place to test how brave you were and to drive the length of the road and cross the bridge with either no headlights on or just your parking lights. Kids would also dare each other to cross the bridge on foot and, in the summer, to jump off the bridge at midnight because they claimed that the lost souls of the drowned pioneers would grab you and pull you under. I'm sure all of the urban legends and history fuel it, but the place definitely has an unsettling vibe at night when you're out there alone with no other cars on the road. This story I'm about to share with y'all takes place more than a decade ago, but I will always remember it as if it were yesterday. I've always been a believer in the paranormal, and after experiencing this, I feel like it's opened me up more to the other side. So as I said, these events happened over a decade ago, 12 years ago to be exact, in New Jersey, where I still live today. I was 19 to 20 at the time, and my friends and I had this tradition every other Monday of going to Pizza Hut and then going in search of places that were featured in the Weird New Jersey magazine. We had heard about this one place called Mount Misery and thought it was the perfect spot to go, as it wasn't very far from us. We eventually make our way out there and pull onto the dirt road that goes through Mount Misery. A little background on the location turns out that, from what my friend had told me, this place used to be at one point a gathering spot for the KKK, and they would kill people out in the woods. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. Now here's where things start to get a little weird for me, at least. We saw what looked like a religious retreat or church that was owned by the United Methodist Church, weird but not the weird part I was talking about, and we thought, oh great, this is going to be a bust, and we wasted our time. Wrong. Once you drive past that, it's just nothing but wood, creepy ass wood. We came to a fork in the road and decided to go right, and by this time I was starting to say this is lame and it's a waste of time, so I decided to lean against my door with my head resting on my hand and close my eyes out of boredom. Next thing I know, my body suddenly tenses up, I get really warm, I start breathing heavily, and I start to feel aggressive and angry. After this starts, I feel like I no longer have 100% control of my body. My friend next to me in the back seat starts to get worried and asks if I'm okay. I look at him, and I fight back the urge to attack him. Now my friends in the front are getting worried and freaked out, and my friend who was driving immediately makes a U-turn to book it out of there, and while he's making the U-turn, I, without any control whatsoever, begin to laugh the most evil maniacal laugh I've ever heard come out of me. Now my friends are really freaking, and we nope out of there, and just before we reach the highway, my body suddenly goes cool and limp, and I'm huffing and puffing like I'm out of breath. I sit back in my seat, and as I'm looking out the back window up at the sky, I ask, what the duck just happened? This was honestly the most effed up thing that ever happened to me, and I will never forget it. I never really figured out what happened to me that night, and I went back there a few times since and never had anything like that happen to me again. Well, it started when my friend destroyed his Jeep while driving through a ditch. We were off-roading with a few guys, and this dude did some stupid shit. Well, he had to get his Jeep towed, and the other guy we were with decided he would stay behind with him and let one of us take his Jeep home. We're on our way back in his Jeep at around 2 in the morning. We're doing around 50 or 60 miles per hour. Suddenly, his Jeep starts shaking violently, and after about 15 minutes of trial and error, we figure out that the only way to prevent that is to constantly change speeds. We would alternate going between 15 and 55 miles per hour. While we're in this 15-minute trial and error period, a few terrifying things happen. We're in the middle of Alabama at 2 a.m. We give the owner a call and ask what the duck is wrong. He said it's a normal occurrence after off-roading, and he's sorry he didn't tell us. Okay, whatever. After about 5 minutes after the call, a ducking huge pack of wild dogs came running straight up to the side of the Jeep. There were about 20 dogs, all barking and jumping at us. We sped up and drove away immediately. We eventually hit an area with some houses and a church. I look to my right, and behind the church is a giant burning cross. I turned everyone's attention towards it and told them to drive away right now. I was terrified. We drove the rest of the way home without incident. Needless to say, I probably won't be going back to Alabama. Okay, so yesterday night I went to pick up my dog from my dad's house, and something really weird happened. It was around 10 p.m., and I picked up my dog from my dad's house. I have driven from his house at night 1,000 times, and I know the road like the back of my hand. He lives on a ranch, and to get back on the freeway, you have to turn left when the road forks. So I'm driving to the end of his road, but the fork never comes. I keep driving on, and the road isn't ending. After a good 10 minutes, note that this road is rather short and should have only been 2 minutes, the road finally forks. I make a left, and on the side of the road, I see glowing eyes, they look like a cat. Then the road just ends in a big ditch. This road should have led to the freeway. I turned around and started driving back when, all of a sudden, a dog jumped on the side of my car. This thing is growling and snarling at the window. This is going to sound lame, but I got chills and a really bad feeling of dread, and I'm like, 90% sure that was not a dog. I slowed down and panicked because I thought I was going to accidentally hit it. I love dogs, even satanic ones, lol. Then it disappears. I looked around the car with my flashlight. This thing was gone. I floored it out of there, turned back on what I thought was the main road, and kept driving. I got the GPS to navigate back to my house, and it said I was a little less than 10 miles away from the freeway. This is literally impossible because the road my dad lives on is neither that long nor leads to any road that long. I was so panicked that I floored it home and forgot to expand the map to see where I was. Once I got home and calmed down, I went on maps to try and see where I went, and it doesn't exist. There is not a single road that long nor resembles anything like I saw anywhere in that area. I have no clue what happened, and my friend and I are convinced I traveled to an alternate universe for a bit last night, and the cat that then turned into a dog was a skinwalker. This just happened to me and one of my friends about half an hour ago as we were driving home from the movie Nobody, which was pretty funny, I recommend. Anyway, as we are driving, we come to a four-way intersection. Directly in front of us is the entrance to a public park. We take a left turn and then continue to drive straight. We pass a gas station on our left, followed by a bookstore. I grew up in this area, so I know this scenery and these locations like the back of my hand. We continue driving straight, and next thing I remember, my friend points to our right and says, "Hey, isn't that the entrance to name of park?" I look at him dumbfounded, he's looking just as shocked as I am. Next, I see the same gas station on our left, followed by the same bookstore. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before, and I'm still pretty shaken up about it. What I find is an odd detail: when the two of us saw the park entrance the first time, we were directly across from it. The second time we saw it, we were driving on the road perpendicular to where we saw it the first time. I wish I could explain in much more detail, as I have a couple of wild theories that need more context, but regardless, it was a very chilling experience. Driven for many years, the only weird thing that always stood out was when I was 18, a long time ago. I just learned to drive and bought a second-hand Mk3, I think, Cortina for about $1 ton. It was rusty as hell, but seemed solid mechanically. I had some cash due to some summer work I'd done and decided to cement my driving skills by going on a tour of the country. I started in my home county of Norfolk and thought I'd try and make it to my uncle's in Aberdeen. I had a great time making my way up the country, stopping in random towns and villages, drinking with locals, and sleeping in the car, sleeping bag in the back, all my shit on the passenger seat. It took about 3 days to hit the Highlands, and the car was going well, though it and I were really smelly at this point. Anyway, to the point, I was going down some long winding road and I saw a female hitchhiker, really distinctively dressed. She was blonde, very attractive, wearing hot pants and a t-shirt, odd for Scotland in early October. Now normally I'd definitely have picked up, especially at my age then. However, all I could think of was how much me and the car stunk and that I had my grundies on the passenger seat. As I slowed and went past her, it was quite narrow, and she almost stepped on the road. I tried to avoid eye contact as I went past her, embarrassed to not be stopping. I immediately regretted it and carried on up the road, doing about 40 miles per hour, as it was in the middle of nowhere and completely empty. I decided I'd made a mistake and thought I should pull over, tidy up my crap, and go back for her. I internally debated this for a couple of minutes before deciding to do this at the next lay-by. I'd gotten about 5 miles down the road at this point after about 10 minutes of driving. I turned a slight bend, still scanning for a decent stopping point, when somehow she was there again on the side of the road. I genuinely couldn't work out what was going on, but I slowed right down, and it was exactly the same girl, same clothes, same hair, standing in exactly the same way with her thumb out. As I went past this time, she again almost stepped out right in front of me. I've never been able to work out what the hell happened, how she made it further down the road faster than I could drive, or if it was some weird twin shit, but I've never really been able to forget it. We went, so I called shotgun since I didn't want to be in the back since I was low-key afraid to go, but I went since I was being made fun of. While heading there, my cousin sticks his head out and yells, "Where's the ghost at? Y'all can't touch us." I told him to chill, and he did, to my surprise. We then arrived at the bridge, and it was pretty old and not safe if you ask me, but then my cousin got the brilliant idea to turn off the truck and lights and wait, so we did, and after a minute, which seemed like forever, I felt a pressure of not being wanted there, and I asked if anyone else felt it, and they said no, so I told my friend driving to let's go. I didn't feel comfortable, so he turned on the truck, and we drove off. He then drives towards the exit to the highway, but then he decides to turn around because he wants to drive around more. Then we come to the bridge again, but this time don't stop. Now this next part I can't make up, I've never seen anything like this happen before. Note that there wasn't any rain, wind, or animals in sight. As we were about to pass this tree, a branch, I'd say around 3 feet, flew out from behind the tree and onto the road. My friend immediately guns the gas and speeds on this dirt road. You're not supposed to drive fast on this road due to the big holes and rough terrain, but we were all in shock, and he didn't care, he wanted out of there ASAP. During the fight or flight moment, my other friend in the back starts saying that something is behind us and coming up fast, but he was buzzed, so I don't know if he was just talking or being real. My cousin wanted to look, but my friend said, "No, don't, I don't think it wants us to look." At that point, I was scared out of my mind, and so were my friends. We managed to get out onto this road that connects to the dirt road, with houses and even a church nearby, and my friend decided to try this thing on his truck, which is shift manual or something like that, and it suddenly revs hard by itself. I asked him why he was doing that, and he replied that he wasn't. Now we're like, what's going on? And we get off to check the truck to make sure nothing is wrong, and then my cousin screams and points behind his head the handprints of someone, and you can clearly see them, and none of us ever went to the back of the truck nor touched the window. So we all get in the truck, drive back into town, and go to a gas station where we see handprints of what seemed like kids. We were all confused about what or who could have done this. I mean, no one had hands that small or even covered with dirt to pull that off. I haven't gone to that road at night since that day, and I'm not sure if I'll ever go back. Whatever was on that road wanted us to know it was there. My friend and I just drove from Salt Lake City to Ventura, California. There's a ghost town exit where we pulled off to get some drinks at a little rundown station. She stayed in the car. We had talked about the 15 cents credit for bottles in California on our way there, and I noticed that they actually charge you the 15 cents when you buy the bottles. I thought it was interesting, so when I returned to the car, I began to tell her about it. Well, it didn't take but a moment to realize she looked like she had seen a ghost. Her expression was pretty much like that kid on The Sixth Sense. After I finished telling her about the markup, she asked, "Can we go?" I asked her what was wrong, and she said my seat belt was making sounds like it was fastening, and the release button kept pressing and decompressing itself while I was in the store. She said she felt really weird, and so we took off and continued silently on our way. We were about 5 minutes down the road when she turned the light on and turned around in her seat to grab a drink from the back. I noticed a sign that said 30, or 100 or whatever, miles to Los Angeles, and so I said, "We're about 30, or whatever, miles from LA," and she didn't say anything. I was getting an uneasy feeling. I asked her if she was feeling any better, and I could feel her staring at me, so I turned my head to meet her gaze. "Are you feeling any better?" I repeated. "Yeah," she said and paused. 4 seconds later, she said, "No." Another 5 minutes had passed, and she asked me, "Did you just say something about 30 miles?" "Yeah, like 5 minutes ago." "I need a drink," she said, turning to grab one from the back. "You already have one right there." "When did I open that?" "About 10 minutes ago." The last thing she remembered was leaving the gas station. A little while later, our conversation had dissipated, and it was quiet again. I was uneasy and could feel her staring at me. I turned my head to meet her gaze, but she wasn't staring at me, she was taking selfies. Then she frantically asked me to pull over at the next exit, which I did. In one of her selfies, there was a dark outline of a person in our back seat, staring at me. We got out of the car. I said very plainly to whatever it was that we couldn't give them a ride any further. We regained our composure, and once we got back into the car and continued our journey, we had no further problems. I had two during my time on night shift taxis. One night while driving home, around 4/5 am in the pitch black, I heard something dragging or scratching from my front left wheel, so I pulled over in a lay-by about 100 meters up the road, a lay-by for a graveyard in the middle of nowhere, the nearest house at least a mile away. My wheel arch liner had fallen off and was scraping on the wheel. So I went in the boot, grabbed the pack of cable ties, and started securing the liner. Then I heard a child's voice, clear as day, around 10 years old and probably a boy. "What you doing?" It sounded barely a foot or so away from my shoulder. "Shat a brick." Fixing my car." Then quick AF got up and got back in the car and out of there. There was nobody around. The other time, me and another driver were on our way back from a 2-car job to Aberdeen, on the phone to each other, again very late at night. As we're approaching Brecon/Montrose on the motorway, we both see a man walk across our lane 10 to 15 car lengths in front of us, then disappear at the central barrier. Maps suggested a road worker was killed there a few years before. Both times, the temperature instantly plummeted, as did the usual goosebumps, etc. This is a warning for anybody living in or visiting Fairbanks, Alaska. Avoid the eastern side of Farmers Loop and Sheep Creek Road at night. About 10 years ago, I saw my first monster. I was driving home from the hospital with my mom. We lived in the middle of Farmers Loop. Since the hospital is closer to the eastern side, we took that side home. Almost right after turning onto Farmers Loop, there is a clearing. Some may call it a field due to its size, but it's just a clearing. There is a big metal tower in the middle of it, and it is surrounded by a forest, in case you want to look for it. I was in the passenger seat, and it was dark that night, so my mom had the lights on in the car. When we were about to drive away from the clearing and pass by the forest, we saw it. At first, we thought it was a dog, but then it came out of the ditch and into the light. It was crawling around on all fours and looked like a naked person crawling around on the ground, but its skin was too pale. My mom started screaming and driving faster. I was just a kid, so I got freaked out. As we drove by, it lifted its head, and I saw its face. There were either no eyes or it just had black eyes. There was no mouth, but I could have sworn it was trying to smile. We only talked about it in the car that night, and then never again. I have tried bringing it up to her, but she says she doesn't remember, but there's a look in her eyes every time I ask her that tells me she knows exactly what it is. That's part of the reason to avoid that side of Farmers Loop. There is also a feeling that lingers on the eastern side of that road. It is like poison. I have never seen a place transform like that segment of road. Before, it was filled with happy people who led good lives. Now it's filled with people who fake being happy, but you can tell something is wrong. There is also a homeless camp out there called Dead Man's Cemetery to avoid. If you go too late at night, there is a man who stands by the road and stares you down. After 10 years of no monsters and almost being convinced that nothing bad that happened over the last 10 years was real, something happened tonight that proved to me that the poison is real and it's moving. I decided to go for a late night drive, and that drive took me past the university and down Sheep Creek Road. There was a big flash of light past the university, almost like an explosion. I thought nothing of it until the next one came. 2 minutes later, when the next flash hit, my car's tire light came on. It's been having the same issue for a while now, so I decided to just turn back to Fairbanks and grab some air for the tire at the gas station. I came around a bend looking for a spot to turn around, and I saw the reason for the flashes of light. Beyond the hill, I could see lightning, but it wasn't normal. There were about 6 of them coming out of the sky from the same spot and then curving outwards before touching down in the same spot, and they were quiet. I just thought it was weird and went to get my tire aired up. After getting the air in the tire, I decided that I was just too curious to go home and ignore the flash, so like an idiot, I went back. The flashes of light were coming every 3 minutes, and more people than I'd ever seen were leaving their homes on Sheep Creek. When I went around the bend earlier, it got dark, and I don't mean middle of the night darkness, I mean it was so dark you could only see the road and the trees that the light from the car showed on. You couldn't even see the sky. However, I kept driving. Right before the train tracks, when I was facing the hills, the lightning touched down, and there was another flash. Except this one was big enough to light up the sky, and I could see everything. The light lasted about 10 seconds, and I could see what looked like the shape of a person in the lightning. From where I was, I could make out arms, legs, a torso, and a head. After that, there were no more flashes, and I raced home. So, here I am writing this as a warning to Fairbanks: don't take those roads at night. You may come across the monster with no eyes or the person in the lightning, and I'm pretty sure they are not friendly. On September 22nd, the love of my life died unexpectedly. He is the most important person to me, and I've never been able to bond with anyone like I had with him. It was absolutely devastating, to say the least. A month prior to this, I started feeling weirdly spiritually driven. I started meditating and chanting, which led me to hear my intuition very clearly and follow it. Although I've always thought myself to be spiritual, I've never actually put it into practice. 2 weeks before he died, I found this spot out in the woods and started building this structure, like a big teepee hut, and on the inside was a big circle on the ground of balanced sticks and branches to form what looked like a nest. I used it as my sacred space. I'm not sure why, but I became obsessed with it. I was out there 10 hours a day working on this thing. I even cemented in the enormous branches and trunks I used as main posts with mud that I had to climb down into the banks near the river for. It was honestly a ton of work, but I loved it and felt so driven. The day after he died, I went out there and decided to make it a memorial for him. I spent all day painting it. I had been drinking, sobbing, and screaming, and by nighttime I decided I wanted to go for a drive. It was stupid, but I was out of the country. I drove for a long time down random roads, listening to the music we shared a love for, and continuing to scream and sob. I kept screaming at him, asking him how he could be so stupid. I screamed that I hated him. I was so emotional that I was driving with my head facing down on the steering wheel. I was going 65 on these country roads. I left my brights purposefully off and was not even looking up at the road unless I could feel my car start to skid from the looser sand at the sides of the road. I literally couldn't pick my head up. I was so distraught. I ended up pulling over because a friend had called me to see if I was alright, and obviously he could tell I wasn't. He told me to come back into town and see him so I wouldn't be alone. I mapped my GPS to his place because, at this point, I had no idea where I was. My GPS is messed up and sometimes won't load my navigation, but it says to just go straight for many miles. I didn't put my seatbelt on, and I started driving again, and this normal country road turns into this very narrow, obviously not often used road. Only one car could go down it. There was very loose sand on the two paths for each side of the tires, with grass growing in the middle. I ended up breaking down like before and was again sobbing and screaming with my head face down on the steering wheel, driving about 60 miles per hour. Honestly, I had genuinely hoped that something bad would happen to me. I really didn't care. This part was very strange, and it's what made me lift my head up. All of a sudden, I can feel him, my significant other, sitting right next to me. It's so strange to try and explain, but for some reason I just knew he was sitting there, so my head shoots up and I look over. In my mind, I can see him and his facial expression with absolute clarity. My mouth is hanging open when I turn to look at the road in front of me. There is an owl standing directly on the road in front of me. I have never actually seen an owl that's not up in a tree, and at first I had no idea what it was and was scared. I get closer to it, and it's not moving, so I honk my horn and hit my brakes a little because I can't just come to a complete stop to not hit it, as I'm going too fast on this sandy road. My honking does nothing to scare it off, and I'm now right in front of it. I hit my brakes more than I thought was safe, and my car starts sliding around. Exactly right before I hit this owl, it flies up in front of my car. I remember watching it for a brief moment and realizing then that it was an owl. Its wings were so big. I don't think I've ever seen an owl fly before. That's when I look forward and can now see that this road just ends at this steep hill, and I am literally about to crash into it. It wasn't like a slope that my car would go up, either. It was like a wall. I slammed down fully on my brakes and slide into it, but just barely. I sat there in shock for a second. Then I started screaming, "What the duck?" Had that owl not been standing there refusing to move, I would not have hit my brakes twice before, slowing my car down enough to make it possible for me to stop without sliding on this sandy road right into this hill. I was very shocked about this for days and have no idea why that owl was standing out in the open like that. It seriously looked like it was standing there, just waiting for me. This happened today, and I am still in shock. So tonight I did a 2-hour drive to go back home, and it was nighttime. I was getting out of the mountains, which are followed by desert, and not taking an exit for miles ahead. There's only 2 lanes on this part of the highway. I was driving on the right when, all of a sudden, I saw headlights coming towards me pretty fast. I couldn't see what kind of car it was, but I drive an SUV, and these lights were low, so I knew it was a lower car. I look in both mirrors to watch the car. It was just us 2 cars here. Then I physically turn my head to see the car. I see it in my blind spot now. I turn my head back to the road where I'm admiring the big, bright full moon when, all of a sudden, the spot where the car's headlights were supposed to be goes pitch black. I looked back and didn't see a car. Mind you, there was no exit nearby. We were just getting out of the mountains. There would have been absolutely nowhere for this car to go. I was so confused, and when I look back ahead, I see a big, lit up cross on the side of the road. All white lights. I started to get spooked out. I've done this drive a million times and never saw that. This was my first time driving at night in a while since I had a weird experience the previous time too. I was speechless. I decided to search it online and realized some people see ghosts or phantom cars. One person suggested searching the area for recent accidents. That's when I found 2 articles from a month ago, on a date that was significant to me. An elderly man died in that area in a singular. He was the only car/fatality, crash. Something else that's a crazy coincidence too? He was a resident of the extremely small town I live in. I am genuinely so shaken up. I wonder if he was showing me what happened moments before he passed away. Or warned me. I have no idea, but what I do know is that I was /m of state mind and saw a car disappear into thin air. There is an old legend in Virginia of a road in Yorktown called Crawford Road. There are tons of ghost stories about that road, one of which is about an African American lady who hung herself off of the bridge and can still be seen hanging herself off the bridge if you go under and look behind you. There are other stories of soldiers walking down the road, lights in the distance, and cars stalling when you park under the bridge. There are a lot more stories that you can look up on your own, but this is the story of what me and my friends experienced down that road. I was personally not a believer in ghosts because I never saw one until that night. To keep the identities of my group safe, I will be referring to myself as me and my friends W, N, J, and A. So to start the day, we were talking about some paranormal experiences, and me and W mentioned that we had never had a paranormal experience before. So W was determined to have one tonight and wanted to know of a haunted location. I remembered a friend of mine who lives in Yorktown telling me of the legends of Crawford Road, and I brought it up to the group. We checked the time it would take to get there, and we decided to kill some time until it got dark. All the while, we were reading different stories online to see what we were getting into. Needless to say, everyone was pretty excited, but we were not prepared for what would happen. Once night hits, we go down the road, and we don't see anything unusual as many other cars were also going down the road, and there was a cop sitting at the top of the bridge. So we decided to go get some food while we waited a bit longer for the road to get less busy and the cop to leave. About an hour later, we go back down the road. Once we get to the bridge, there is another group of people on the road as well, looking to see what they can find. We talk for a bit, and they say that they haven't seen anything, so our group goes up on the top of the bridge to see what we can find. We are all up there, and we don't really see anything besides a strange symbol on the road and a graffiti duck. We see a car coming, and we don't want to get caught up there, so me, W, and A go back down while N and J stay up there and turn their lights off. After less than 2 minutes, we hear N and J running down and freaking the duck out. They said that they both saw a tall woman dressed in white walk out of the woods into the bridge. Obviously, like idiots, our group walks up to see her. We couldn't see her when we went up there, but as we looked down on the road to see if we could find anything, all of a sudden we heard an angry scream off in the distance. We all booked the duck out of there, and the other group bailed as well as soon as they heard the scream. We started to drive away from the bridge, determined to see an actual ghost. All of us had our windows down and were taking constant pictures while driving. Eventually we hear Jay panically tell us to drive ducking faster, and he is sticking his head out of the window. Once we got far enough away, he said that he saw something on 4 legs running after the car. This was only the start. We began to look at the pictures we had taken and watch the video we had been taking the whole time we were down there. In the video, when we heard the scream and started to run, we could clearly hear a gargled cackle that we didn't hear at the moment. And the pictures were even worse. Some of them were nothing, but a lot of Jay's photos had a mysterious glow in them, and one of N's photos was completely white, while the rest were fine. In some of the photos, we could see a strange blue box in both J and A's pictures, which was made even worse because they were on opposite sides of the car. And the worst one was when N took a picture of the side view mirror and could clearly see a face with 2 black eyes. We were properly freaked out, but we decided to drive down the road one more time and do the same thing and take pictures on all sides of the car. While going down it, we didn't see anything of interest until at the bridge, when Jay said there was someone in white waving at the car. But the pictures were a completely different story, as one of the pictures that N got was of the 4-legged creature sitting on top of a broken fence post, like it was waiting for us. After that, we decided to get out of there and finally get home. When we get back, we can clearly see a large handprint and a small handprint on the window on Jay's side. We also see a multitude of other handprints on the car, as well as scratch marks. And on the back of the car, we see the same symbol as on the top of the bridge. When I got home, I looked into further detail about the stories from others and found out that the scream was something of a call to the others on that road, which would explain the creature chasing us, but I haven't been able to find a single one about a 4-legged creature chasing them. This had to be the scariest night of my life, and we are all planning to come back to Crawford Road and see what else we can find. So tonight I took a trip to Paradise Road in Jefferson, Wisconsin, with my sister and her boyfriend. My sister was in the back seat, I was in the passenger seat, and her boyfriend was driving the car. It was about 6:15 p.m. when we decided to go, and we got there around 6:45 p.m. We turned onto the road, the less haunted part, and I was talking about my past paranormal experiences with my friends. Then Seth looked behind us, a more haunted part, and there's a car, he pointed out. All of us had a bad feeling about it. My sister kept looking back at it because it was pretty close to us, and she was terrified. A while after we got past the abandoned house, the car was gone. There was absolutely no way to turn off that road. The car was just gone. We did some digging and found out a lot of people also claim they have had a car follow them down the road before or pull over when someone was on the side of the road. 10 out of 10, I would definitely go back. Back in 2007, my senior year of high school, I was driving myself and two other of my really good friends back to one of their homes after a basketball game. I distinctly remember it being a clear night with the stars out and no clouds or fog in sight. We had just exited the town and were a few miles out of town limits. As we continued to drive, we came to the apex of a particular hill. As we began our descent, we all noticed and commented on something we saw at the bottom of it that was very strange. We saw what looked like a giant ball of smoke, with a lot of these weird-like tentacles around it. I don't have a good estimation of how big it was, but I know it was extremely large based on the size of it when we were a good distance away. It was stationary on the right side of the highway. The body of the thing was not moving around, but it did have that foggy appearance that made it seem like the tentacle-looking things were. We started to question ourselves as soon as we saw it, but the closer we got, the more we noticed that it was clear this was something out of the ordinary. As we got near it, something really unexpected happened. I want to say that when we got around 30 or so feet from it, this once stationary, condensed ball of smoke shot across the highway at an insane rate of speed. The acceleration of it was mind-boggling. As we were already questioning what it was when we first saw it, we began to yell in disbelief when it sped across the road. As we were continuing to freak out over what we saw, we eventually got to the path where that apparition-looking thing had crossed the highway. As soon as I went over that path, fluctuations. It didn't really sound like white noise from a TV. It's hard to describe it since it's been so long, but I remember it being extremely unsettling. I was aghast by what I had just witnessed, and then getting that extremely odd voicemail as soon as I had crossed the path of the smoke thing made me start to act out in disbelief. The other guys didn't realize what had happened, but then I told them about the voicemail I just got. I let them listen to it as we continued to drive. I remember them being as surprised as I was while I watched them listen to it. After they did, we made ourselves believe that we saw something paranormal. When we arrived at the house, we talked about the craziness of it all as we laid around under the covers before eventually falling asleep. We had discussed it the following days, but we had no explanation of what we had witnessed and never really came to a conclusion either. We told other students about what we saw and let them listen to the voicemail, but most didn't believe us, which I had suspected would happen. I guess actually witnessing what we did and hearing it secondhand was always going to be different. As the days and years went by, we eventually parted ways, but every once in a while, when I see them, we bring it up. Honestly, I still think about it to this day. Like I said, there could be a very logical explanation, but I think the way it played out made me believe that there might be more to this reality than I had originally thought. I destroyed my motorcycle in a big crash caused by a van driver going for a three-point turn without looking. That might have been worse, but I was going relatively slowly, having had a prescient moment on that road a few days previous, saw the Grim Reaper out of the corner of my eye, complete with scythe, which turned out, in daylight, to be a big old rotten tree covered in ivy, but that isn't the real spooky story. A few months after the crash, I wanted to ride again. Badly. My mate loaned me a little old bike, CD 175 I think, which had had a hard life but was dead easy to ride and vitally had a light clutch. So I togged up and sat on the bike for a bit, making sure I could operate all the controls, which were still a bit broken, you see. I sucked it up and set off. It took me 10 minutes to relax, but then it got easier. Another 10 minutes, and it was feeling good. I was out in the countryside by then, the sun was out, and the bike was going well. I came to a straight end and wound it open. Oh, yes, that's better. Bending up, I closed the throttle, and someone tapped me on the shoulder. Fair shit, I looked around, but of course there's nobody there. I stopped, got off, and went for a walk. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, had a smoke, and got back on. 10 minutes later, I turned around to head home. On the same rural B road, as the straight appeared, I opened her up, and we fairly flew along until the next bend, when I closed the throttle, and it happened again. Tap tap on my left shoulder. I jumped out of my skin. Again. I nearly crashed, looking around and crapping myself. I gritted my teeth and went home. Quickly. As quickly as the wheezy 175 would go, anyway. I nailed it down the next straight. Elbows out, chins on the clocks, all that. Before the next corner, I popped up and kept my eyes on the mirrors. I rolled off the gas, sat up, and then I saw it. The lid of the top box, a huge plastic box bolted behind the seat, wasn't shut, locked, or secured, and it had opened on its hinges as I sat up, creating a low pressure area behind my back. When I braked, the lid came right up and forward into me until I moved or got off the brakes, when it would close again. As if it had never moved. I had to stop again. Oh, I laughed. I called myself all the silly sods, as you do. I got back on, rode home, and went to the pub. But I'll never forget that feeling of being tapped on the back at 60 miles per hour when I was alone. So I was a teen when this happened to me, and I was with a group of my friends and my girlfriend at the time. She was driving, I was sitting up front, and 3 of our friends were in the backseat. We decided we wanted to try and get the shit scared out of us by going up to the haunted horseshoe tunnel that let the road go under the tracks. Looking back, what a dumb idea, but at the time it seemed fun, and none of us thought something was going to actually happen because people had been doing it for years and you rarely ever heard a story worth believing. It was also summer, so we felt less scared going up there than we would have in the fall. Kind of dumb. I know it's not like ghosts only come out in October. But either way, we drove up to the tunnel and parked in the middle. My ex turned off her car, flashed her lights 3 times, then honked 3 times, which is what is supposed to summon the ghost. We waited a few moments for something to happen, but nothing did, so she tried to start the car. Click. That's all we heard. The battery had somehow sucked out on us, and the car wouldn't start. Now my first fear wasn't of a ghost, it was of another car that didn't know we were in the tunnel. So after a few minutes of the car not starting at all, me and my 3 friends who were in the back pushed the car out of the tunnel and off the road to a pull-off area right outside the tunnel. I popped the hood and used my phone flashlight to see if maybe her battery cables were loose or something, but everything looked fine. She got back in the car, and out of nowhere, it started up, and after that, she wasn't having it anymore and wanted to leave. I wasn't that far behind her with the whole wanting to leave thing, because I like to trust my gut at every opportunity, and my gut was telling me that it felt different up there that night. The air was heavy, and I started to feel like something was watching us, but it was a pretty humid summer night, so that could explain it feeling heavy, but not someone watching us. Now the curve area is known for having some drifter types up in the woods who come down into town at night to grab up people's aluminum and raid restaurant dumpsters, but they normally stay in the area south of the curve, where the trains have to go slower, so they can hop one. So I felt pretty confident that there wasn't a person out in the woods watching us. One of my later experiences has made me somewhat rethink this. Besides the car miraculously starting up, I noticed other weird things starting to happen all around us. It was just little things, but enough to catch my attention. Myself and my 3 friends who were standing outside of the car could clearly hear what sounded like someone banging a hammer on the metal rails. Then we started to hear what sounded like carts rolling down the tracks. I could even hear the flat spots on the wheels. If you live anywhere near train tracks that are frequently used, you know what I mean. But when we looked, we saw nothing, just some dark wood and an empty parking lot that was across the street. By now, we were all really freaked out and were finally agreeing with my girlfriend that we should leave. So we all get back in the car and start on our way down the road, when, out of nowhere, the radio station starts changing. I swear, it was right out of a movie. The stations kept changing rapidly before it settled on 88.3, which is a state college religious radio station. The car shouldn't have been able to pick up the signal that far away, especially where we were, because cellular service and radio signals are basically impossible in some spots around the curve. A preacher was giving a sermon on the belief in the devil as a physical being in our world, and it scared the shit out of all of us. That's the last thing you want to hear on the radio in a place like that after weird SHT has already been happening. My girlfriend turned off the radio, and we kept driving. All of us were just kind of in shock, I guess, because you don't believe things like that can happen until they do happen. From there, things started to get even weirder. Now keep in mind that we had just pulled back onto the road from the pull-off across the street from the curve's gift shop and museum. So we weren't far from the curve at all. In fact, we were still surrounded by it on 3 sides. Her car began to run really rough and started misfiring and slowing down. I guess panic made her keep her foot on the gas because the car didn't stall, and as we got further from the tunnel and the curve, the car started to run better. My friends in the backseat also swore up and down that while we were driving away, they could see figures running across the road, illuminated by the traffic light. The rest of the drive home, We sat in silence and didn't talk about what happened until later that night, when we were all able to relax and calm down. The next day, I did some research into the stories surrounding the curve but couldn't find anything that fit ours quite right. People had reported their cars stalling before, but that was where the similarities started. I personally think that we lingered too long, and the car stalling was a warning for us to leave, and when we didn't leave, the pressure was laid on. My ex and I are still friends, and she remembers it all just as well as I do, but she blames me partly for not wanting to leave. In reality, I didn't want to seem like a wimp in front of my friends, and I thought somehow I was impressing her, but I was just being a moron instead. I've gone back many times and had other experiences. Plus, experiences not related to the curve or that happened somewhere near the area. When I drive through that tunnel at night now, I go as fast as possible and find myself being afraid to look in my mirrors. I still hear stories from people who go up there to try and get scared, most of them unbelievable in nature. But I know what happened to me and my friends that night. Something was angry we were there, it decided to show itself that night in force.